Good morning, everybody, and good morning to those who are on the call live, and good morning to those people who are picking up on it later. And so today's topic is you are not born with dyslexia. And I will, why am I picking this topic? Because I know it's controversial and it's a belief that I have, but the more worrying belief is that people think that they are born with dyslexia and there is nothing they can do about it. And so I want to raise this as a topic and get people to realize that they don't have to be stuck in dyslexia. They can do something about it. And there is some fundamental questions that have not been asked up until now. And so this is raising the lid on those, if you like. The first thing is that there's no evidence that people are born with dyslexia, because nobody's spelling and reading when they're born, and so therefore you can't possibly tell. What many people are born with, and we actually do know this, is that they are very creative and imaginative, and they've got good mental imagery, and we can tell that from a number of things. The first thing is that children will recognize their parents at 6 weeks old. So how are they doing that? They're doing that because they've got a picture in their head of their parent and they smile at them when they see them. And it's a typical question that the health visitor will ask you about whether your child smiles at you. And that's because they've got a picture in their head of you. And if you wear a pink curly wig, for example, they're going to cry because that's not my mum. And so we know they have pictures in their heads, and some of them have astounding pictures in their heads, even when they're very young. And of course, the one thing that does run in families, and you can see this all the time, is that creativity runs in families. But you don't know whether that's nature or nurture. And you see children growing up who are artistic and their parents are artistic, or their parents are engineers and their parents have got some of the skills we talked about last week, and so they've got good mental imagery, and these kids have got absolutely fantastic mental imagery. So what I'm trying to do is to get people off of thinking that this is you're born with it and there is nothing you can do about it. What I firstly want to do is talk about a typical parent story, and I hear so many of these. I thought I would try and explain them to you. You get parents saying that, you know, my child was quite bright, they were doing well, they were starting to learn words okay. Then they went to school and met phonics that they didn't understand, and they're big picture creative thinkers. And so they couldn't cope with the little bits of the phonics, which had sort of no meaning to them. And so then they weren't making the expected progress. And then they got anxious and stressed and their behavior deteriorated. And then it escalated into terror, disaffection with school and learning, and thinking you're stupid. And all of this can happen before the age of 7. And you're told that you need an assessment for your child because they're probably dyslexic. And this is a very, very typical story that I get. But you look at the positives, I start asking the parent about the positive of what they can do, and they're very articulate, they're very imaginative, they're very confident, they're very social, but when they got to year 1, they seemed to lose their focus, and they were struggling getting their thoughts down onto paper, and they miss letters out, and they continuously spell was, W-O-S instead of W-A-S, all of these sort of things. And of course, in parallel, we've got their maths going the same way as well. But you might be lucky with maths and do that better than literacy. And so we get parents of children who are under the age of 7 who are very stressed and they're bewildered. And then as they grow up, they get even more disorganized They can see loads of different perspectives, but they can't concentrate on one of them. Life becomes really difficult. They can see things that others cannot see. So we've got a whole mishmash between these skills that the parents actually have difficulty focusing on because there is so much going wrong. And so they tend to focus on what is going wrong. So there is one thing that you really need to understand, and that is the neuroscience. Now, this isn't difficult, this neuroscience. It is neuroscience 101 for you. And so you will soon see with this why I have the views I have. Let me explain this to you. This is your brain, okay? Over here is called the occipital lobe. We have an occipital lobe when we're born, and we start putting pictures into our occipital lobe. So when I said you recognize your parents, then you will have a picture in your occipital lobe, which is right at the back of your head, just above the dent in your neck. You'll have a picture in your occipital lobe of what your parents look like. And as I said, if they wear a pink curly wig, you'll notice that that's not right. And so you'll cry, but that you're using your occipital lobe. Right next to it is something called the word form area, which surprisingly enough, when you're born, is empty. It's very associated with the occipital lobe, but it's got no words in it, so it's completely empty. And what happens when as you develop, you get the meaning of words. So you start to understand when you're really, really young, the meaning of words. And a bit later on, you start to be able to pronounce them and articulate them, articulate whole sentences. So all that stuff is going on around here in your brain. And here, your eyes are over here. Here is where a word comes into your brain. And that's called the Broca area. And between the Broca area, let me get my mouse here, and the parieto-temporal area, you work out what a word is. That's where you're doing phonics. So you're breaking down a word and you're putting it back together again, and you're being able to read your first word. And for somebody who's trying really, really hard and really struggling, you will actually even see the front of their brain all crinkled up. So that's another thing to look for as they get older. Now, the occipital lobe has got loads and loads of stuff in it. It's got pictures, it's got faces, it's got locations, specialist subjects, numbers, all sorts of stuff in the occipital lobe. But what you've got to do is get the word form area, which is just here, to recognize the word. So once you've done with phonics, you've understood how to say the word, you want to move it into the word form area so that the next time you see the word, you can go on what I call the express pathway, which is the big red arrow here, and you will recognize the word. And funnily enough, that's called word recognition. And people will talk, teachers will talk in school about they're not doing word recognition. They're having to break down the words into phonics all the time. It's because this is the pathway that they're going through. They haven't passed this word onto the word form area. Picture on the right is a typical dyslexic brain where everything is going on in the front of their brain. That's why they get creased up forehead. This is absolutely true, and if you look at the research of people like Stanislav Dehaene, Sally Shaywitz and Maximilian Riesenhuber, you will see exactly this. And they've done the MRI scans, and this is what they see. But the next step is people have said, well, this is a non-dyslexic brain, and this is a dyslexic brain. But what we've proved, and we've been trailblazing this for years, and trying to convince people how easy it is to teach one of these brains on the right to be one of these brains on the left. And the younger you do it, the better. It's much better if you can develop this skill to start with under the age of 7 years old, which is before you're going to be assessed for dyslexia anyway. And it's been fundamentally overlooked in teaching. And you do need both. There's been wars raging for years about about whether phonics is better or whether word recognition is better. And it's like, this isn't a This isn't a debate. You need both. You need phonics for brand new words that you've never seen before, and you need word recognition through the word form area for words you've seen a few times. That there is no argument as far as I'm concerned, and there is no evidence that that's a problem. Everybody agrees that you need word recognition, but they don't agree how to get there, because most people will think you can only get there through phonics, which is not true. Typical dyslexic symptoms, if I give you those on the left-hand side here, and if you've got a dyslexic child, you're going to know all of these. Letters moving on the page, reversing or blurring, skipping words, lines, losing their place, anxiety, stress, can't read fluently, can't make sense of what they read, and nor can they remember it, or poor spelling, punctuation, sequencing, and memory. So, and there is lots more. Those are the ones that relate to literacy. There is lots more which tend to come from this amount of confusion, but actually can be stopped. And the major reasons are really simple and characterized by these little chaps on the right here, is that people are not using the word form area for word recognition and spelling. And I have met thousands and thousands of dyslexics. They are not doing word recognition, and they are not using mental images. They get ungrounded and poor breathing, which tends to jangle their mental imagery. So if you're really ungrounded, the mental images tend to fly around more and make life more difficult. And poor use of mental imagery, so you can't remember what you read. And the four elements that are absolutely essential for reading, and they are totally teachable, is the pictures at the top here, the meaning of the word, the sounds of the word, which is where the phonics comes in, and an effective learning state, which means you're calm and grounded. The current definition of dyslexia is it happens to normal and above average intelligence children, and so it always confuses me that that's the definition, and people are not, if you have the special needs label, you're not really being considered above average, I don't think. It's identified as a neurological condition or even a disorder. And to my mind, it isn't. You haven't learned how to use your brain. And educational psychologist reports focus on not being able to deal with phonics. They almost entirely ignore visual skills. And you're lucky in an educational psychologist report if it says they've got good visual skills, but it's like, and then there's a full stop. It doesn't say, and what are you going to use these visual skills for? I have taught thousands of children to visualize words in less than 30 minutes. Now, they have to go away and practice. And practicing, depending on their age and their motivation, can be difficult, because they can be really fed up with their own failure, or alternatively they can be, they don't think this is the same way they're being taught in school, so it doesn't land with them. There's loads of different ways, but basically it is so quick and easy. If you can get somebody motivated to do this in less than 30 minutes, normally they will go off and keep motivation because they're so excited they can do something. And one thing to stress there is that it's not something weird. It's what the people who on a couple of slides earlier, it's what they're already doing. So if I just go back there for a minute, it's exactly what is going on in that left-hand picture. So it's nothing weird. All we're doing is teaching them how to accelerate their progress to get to the left-hand picture. I have not met a dyslexic who is reliably visualizing words in 20 years. And when they're assessed, they're not asked. It's not covered in school, but every school is committed to multisensory teaching and learning. Visual learning is the pictures they hold in their head. And the only way you know what the pictures they hold in their head is to ask them. Visual teaching is showing people pictures, and they are not the same thing. And phonics is our construction on how to teach literacy. And it's absolutely great for new words. And in a phonological language such as Italian, it's absolutely great. It's not for non-phonological languages like English, that is full of rules and words that break the rules in order to explain it. So my question here is, to end this short summary, is dyslexia genetic? As I say, no dyslexic I have ever met is reliably visualizing words, which is a vital skill, everybody knows, for fluent literacy, comprehension, memory, and so much more. Nobody's born with a populated word form area. And if nobody's born with a populated word form area, are we all born dyslexic? Because we haven't got, when we're born, we haven't got the skill to recognize words. High visual creative skills do run in families. And I was reading a paper lately about whether they think they found a gene for dyslexia called DD2. But whatever the gene they found for it is, you can't prove without doing some more research about whether that's a gene for being highly creative or whether that's a gene for being dyslexic. And visual skills are totally teachable, along with grounding and good breathing. And of course, the whole thing is paralleled in numeracy. There's a whole another set of information. And if you've heard me talk before about this, the test that they run at the age of 7 really assumes for numeracy that they can visualize numbers, and that also isn't being taught. Well, one story about some twins that I worked with, and twins, you know, they were identical twin boys. They come into the planet, you know, with approximately the same genes as far as I understand, and one was dyslexic and one wasn't, and they brought them both along, both exceptionally visual lads. I just taught the one who was dyslexic how to visualize words, and that was the end of the story. He went away to practice. I think I only saw them a couple of times, but you know, if you think of twins, they've got the same DNA, they've got the same nature, they've got the same nurture, everything's going on the same for them, but one is dyslexic and one isn't. And I looked up the statistics last night, and I found a lovely piece about if it was genetic, then you expect 100% of identical twins to both experience it. And it said, well, if one twin's got it, the other one is more than likely something like 50 to 70% likely to also have dyslexia. But again, being very creative and imaginative and having great pictures and no words is also likely to run in families. And one of the things I do know is that every single child I've met over 20 years has always been highly creative. I always ask their parents when they phone me up about, well, what are they good at? And they always tell me it's something creative. So let me just finish there and say the elephants in the classroom is the best way to get started if you want to know more about this. We've got practitioners, some of whom are working one-to-one at the moment, even with lockdown, on Zoom. And we have a set of masterclasses on empowering learning, about rethinking dyslexia for a new decade, which covers a lot of this material and in a lot more detail. And we also have a practitioner course for when you want to become a practitioner and teach other people. I'm going to leave it there, and thank you for coming.